Welcome back to another edition of Curtis Jones Writing. I'm reading out of each of my books. This is my fourth book. I've done Dad's Old Truck 1, Dad's Old Truck 2, Imagination, and I've started the Love Endures All Things series. There's three books in this series, and I'm on chapter 12. I'll read it, then I'll read chapter 13, which was a thing my wife had written. I knew nothing about until after she passed away. It was almost like she talked to me from the grave. But anyway, we will try to get through that, see what we can get accomplished. Hopefully, you enjoy these stories. And if you do, share them with your friends. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. If you hit the bell, then it'll notify you each time I post a new video. And you'll be able to follow along with me as I read all 14 of the books I've published. I hope you enjoy it. If you want to, if you're a new listener and you wanted to hear all the books I've written before, you subscribe to Curtis Jones Writing, and it should bring up everything I've got there. And start with Dad's Old Truck 1. And I think it'll let you work your way all the way through up to where I'm at. Each one of these stories or chapters is someplace from 15 to 45 minutes long. So there's about 24 hours or more of entertainment listed on this channel. So this is chapter 12. If you followed along with me, I got fired from my last job as manager of a Pizza Hut in Duncan, Oklahoma. And this picks up right after that morning when I got fired. And the title of this chapter is Spanish Gold. This morning I was terminated by Chris Newman at Pizza Hut. Stephanie and I got Don and Lyndall to babysit our children. We went to Six Flags over Texas near Fort Worth. We spent the whole day riding rides and seeing shows. The last show was presented by singer Jim Stafford. We sat through the whole show. When most of the people had left, we got another encore. It was very good. We spoke to Mr. Stafford after the show. That was a real treat for both Stephanie and I. We had listened to his songs. The trip back to Duncan was quiet because we were both so tired. We left Fort Worth at midnight. The next morning, we started packing up our things. In a couple of days, we went to Stillwell, Oklahoma to see if we were welcome at Mom and Dad's until we got on our feet again. They had a little two-bedroom house we had all built for Grandpa Jones. He didn't want to live there after it was built. Stephanie and I would move in as soon as Dad could get away to help us make the move. Within 3 days, we were moved to the little house. It had a small kitchen and a small bathroom. It was plumbed by but the water line didn't come into the house. We carried water for drinking and cooking. We also had a barrel of water from the pond for baths and flushing the toilet. We lived there while I applied for unemployment insurance. I had a hearing within a week. When I went to the hearing, Chris was there as well, and he had said I was dismissed for stealing funds from the business. I explained to the mediator what had happened. I presented my letter of recommendation filled out in Chris's own handwriting. They read it and compared it to his writing his written answer, and they awarded me the claim. Chris was so embarrassed. He said nothing, but just got up and walked out of the room. Stephanie and I laughed about it all the way home. My parents were glad to hear about how it went. Mom and Dad moved to Ozark. Stephanie and I moved into their house because it had running water. Uh, it was better than the little house we had lived in that was meant for one old man. I had plenty of time on my hands, so I started making toy trucks out of wood. I used 2x4s and 1x4 blocks. I gave them for Christmas to all my kids and to my nieces and nephews. When winter came, we had snow drifts that were 6 foot deep on top of this mountain. We were not able to get off the hill for 3 days. During the time at Pizza Hut, Dad had been involved in excavating an old Spanish cave located on the western side of the mountain. The land belonged to a family friend we had known for many years. If you remember, I have told you many times about my father's answering to a, or my father's answering to get a rich, rich quick scheme going. Our family friend contacted my father. He needed help, some help, to excavate a Spanish cave supposedly full of golden artifacts or relics. He told my father one day last year a very old Spanish gentleman came to his door and asked for permission to search and on his property. The friend told him that he did not want him on his property. The old gentleman came back a month later. He looked like he experienced some very hard times. This time he told the friend that he had a map that indicated there was Spanish gold buried on this property. The family friend told him he wasn't interested in it. He did not believe the story. The old Spanish gentleman turned around and left looking completely downtrodden. About a month later, he returned. This time, he looked like he had been beaten up. He was bruised and looked so downhearted. He uh, generated sympathy in Dad's friend. The old sad gentleman asked if he could come in and sit down at the friend's table. He showed him the map he had. By this time, the friend had his interest piqued. The determination of the old Spanish gentleman was the reason. He said the old Spaniard looked or took the map and walked around the back of the friend's property. They searched for a rock about 5 foot square that had markings on it. The marks were a kind of code. After about an hour of searching, the old Spanish gentleman called Dad's friend over and showed him a boulder with markings on it. The Spanish gentleman said there should be another boulder 300 foot in a specific direction with markings that were just the opposite of the boulders. They walked in that direction and for about 15 minutes before locating the boulder with the markings. On each of these boulders, they had to scrape green moss off of them to see the markings. They looked like they had been made many years ago. The old Spanish gentleman said that these marks were made in the late 1600s by Spaniards looking to establish missionary churches along the route they took out of Texas. The Spaniard drew a map with these two boulders on it that marked a third boulder that should be set 100 yards from each of those two boulders, forming a triangle. His original map was missing that portion. He had read this in a journal written by one of the survivors of the original group that made the trek up from South Texas. The journal had lots of information that was not on the map. The friend said that the old man walked up the hill to locate the third boulder with markings on it. They also had to scrape off the moss to see the markings. This boulder indicated a shaft to gain entrance into the cave. The Spaniard and the friend went up to the friend's house. They drank coffee and talked. The Spaniard began to tell the story of how he came to have the map and what the map indicated. He had a friend in Spain that found the map in the archives of an old Spanish church that was being renovated. He stole the map and asked the Spaniard if they could partner up and retrieve the treasure. The old man searched some archives and found mention of the expedition to the north of Texas. The Spaniard said that the treasure was gold artifacts used in Catholic church services that were to be left at each missionary building that they had to set up. The last mention, the last mission they had set up was in Texas. This was to be the next missionary building to be established. The Spaniard said there had been 40 people in this expedition with a dozen mules. Five of the mules were carrying the golden artifacts to be left with each missionary church. The records were not clear as to exactly what those artifacts were, but it was clear that they were made of gold. He told the friend that when they stopped at this at his location in 1697, they discovered a cave. There they were going to spend a week there to rest from their travels. They had been there 3 days when they were discovered by local Indians who decided they were going to kill the intruders. The explorers had two barrels of black powder to be used for self defense in their musket. He said more than 20 of the explorers had been killed by the Indians. The remainder decided to make a map up and to use the remaining powder to blow up the entrance to the cave to protect the artifacts. The artifacts included golden chalices, golden trays, gold lampstands, and were items for church services. The Spaniard told Dad's friend that he had been beaten a week earlier by men trying to get the map from him. The fearful old man then buried the map in a large ashtray on the friend's table. Or, I'm sorry, he then burned the map in a large ashtray on the friend's table. He told the friend that he was afraid they might kill him if they caught him. He said that he might not be able to come back, but if he could, he would. He wanted to partner with the friend to dig the gold from the cave. The Spaniard told Dad's friend that he would be back in 2 weeks with enough money to finance the dig. The friend said nothing to anyone about what he had been told. 2 weeks passed and the Spaniard did not return. A month passed and the Spaniard did not return. When 2 months had passed, the friend decided the Spaniard had probably been killed by those trying to retrieve the map, which no longer existed. After 6 months, the friend talked to Dad, who had several pieces of heavy equipment and could be used to excavate an opening into the cave. He also asked he also talked to another man who was a friend to both Dad and Dad's friend, who had other heavy equipment that could be used to open the cave. The first I heard about the cave was when I went up to visit Dad the week I was fired from Pizza Hut. When I got there, they were there. We spent the night. Early in the morning the next day, Dad's friend came to get him. He was pale as a sheep and was trembling. The friend told Dad that their partner's oldest son had been killed while trying to excavate the cave an hour earlier that morning. Not being patient and cautious in trying to open the cave is what caused his death. The boy, who was 24 years old, was using a ditch witch with a stinger turned upside down. Stingers are used to dig trenches for burying pipes. He was digging beneath a 55-ton boulder which fell upon him and the machine in a split second. I went with Dad down to the cave to watch as they tried to remove the young man from beneath the boulder. They were using house jacks and other heavy equipment trying to raise the boulder enough to slide the ditch witch out. Dad had asked them to do nothing until after Monday. He could go get dynamite to blast the boulder into rubble so that it could be removed with the equipment that they had. The boy and his father decided that they could dig through into the cave because it was only 6 foot. The friend said the friend and the boy's father were watching when the boy hacked or backed the ditch witch underneath the boulder. He put the stinger into the dirt at the back, and as soon as the stinger dug through into the opening the, of the cave, the boulder collapsed on the young man. When Dad and I arrived, I walked around under the hill. I could see what was left of the young man crushed beneath the boulder. I wished I had not seen that. It stayed in my mind for many years afterwards. I will not go into the gory details because I do not want to remember it again, and I don't want it stuck in your mind. The partners decided they would not explore the cave any further. The price exacted upon them was too high. Later, a dear friend of mine bought the property. When I came back to Stillwell, he and I crawled down into the cave through the shaft above the cave. The friend had dug out the shaft because the old man had shown him where to dig. It was a steep climb. It was the only opening into the great slab of rock that made up the ceiling of the cave. There was very little oxygen in the cave. You could not stay in there very long or you would suffocate. As Larry, my friend, and I crawled around inside the cave, we found pottery, plates, and bowls scattered about. The top of the cave was covered in black soot from campfires. We knew the cave had been occupied from all the evidence that we saw. The cave itself was filled up to within 4 foot of the roof. You could not stand up inside the cave. There were places around the wall where the partner, the partners in opening the cave had dug to the floor, which was about 7 foot from the ceiling. It made me very nervous to crawl around in the cave. There was so little oxygen inside there. It was hard to take a breath. I spent very little time inside the cave. After Larry bought the property, he was going to open the cave and excavate it to be used for growing mushrooms. The only opening to the cave was a shaft that went straight down 20 foot, about 50 yards behind Larry's house. One of Larry's sons had fallen into the shaft and injured himself. Larry filled the shaft in, and no one has been in the cave since that time. When we had moved to the mountain after Pizza Hut, I began to explore the hills again. About 600 yards over the hills, I found a giant vine hanging from the top of a tall tree. The tree was on the edge of a drop off, not quite a cliff. I told this. I think I wrote this before, but let me go ahead and read it. The vine was strung into the top of with many small branches. The vine made me remember what happened the last time I did this. I was clear in my own mind how that happened. I went back to the house and got an axe so I could cut it loose from the roots. I brought Stephanie and my little brother Henry back down with me. They thought they might like to swing too. I grabbed hold of it and made a run, swinging off the hillside. I found myself about 20 foot off the ground at the apex. I was 20 feet or more away from the bank that at that moment. The swing paused for a fraction of a second. I hung suspended between heaven and earth. That was so exciting. I felt myself begin to move backward toward the bank when I heard the awful sound of that wood cracking. It was the sound of many branches breaking. I knew instantly I was caught by the forces of gravity. My direction changed from horizontal to vertical so fast that I wouldn't have been able to say anything. The sensation was that of jumping off a barn. I felt backwards from my lofty heights. As I looked up, I could see what was left of the vine in the tops of the trees. As I fell in slow motion, I had time to reflect on how foolish it was to swing out over such a steep incline. When I hit the ground, I heard a loud thud. I realized that it was I that made the sound. I tried to take a deep breath and found I couldn't. I had knocked the wind out of myself. I watched as Stephanie and Henry rushed toward me, lying there looking up. I noticed that I had landed between two large boulders, my head missing them by mere inches. If I had fallen 1 or 2 inches in either direction, I would have been telling, or I would not be telling this story. When they arrived at my side, I was still struggling to breathe. Stephanie sat and held my hand until I could breathe normally. When I tried to get up, I could not move my left leg. The shock of the fall had worn off. I knew I had hurt my leg in this fall. Henry got out. Henry got on one side and Stephanie on the other side to lift me from between the rocks. I sat on the square rock to rest and see if I could recover. We sat there for 15 minutes before I decided to go back home. By now, my knee was throbbing in pain. It would not hold my weight. I knew I had destroyed the knee. I would lean on my helpers as I made my way back home. It took over an hour to get back up the hill. Arriving at home, I placed my leg in a elevated position and applied an ice pack. And Stephanie tended to all my needs. The kids were asking if they could do anything for me. Henry went home to mom and dad's house to tell them what had happened in the woods. I couldn't go to work in this condition. I had Stephanie go to mom's and call for me. I did this for 3 days before I was fired. I went to the welfare department. They sent me to a doctor in Fayetteville. We were put on the Aid to Families with Dependent Children program until I could heal. The doctor I was sent to was a sports doctor for the Arkansas Razorback football team in Fayetteville. He was good at his job. I was lucky. When he started treating me, he said I would need surgery to correct the damage to my knee. I had to wait until the swelling had subsided. I had to walk with crutches for several weeks to keep my weight off of it. Back to the time after Pizza Hut, I was told of a cave not far from home. I had decided I would go explore this cave. Stephanie wanted to go with me. One of our one of our first dates was to go to a gold mine cave in California. She enjoyed all the same things I did. I was able to drive to within a quarter mile of the cave opening. We took a coal oil lantern, kerosene lantern, some flashlights with us. We climbed down into the cave. We were able to stand as we traversed the tunnel. There would be smaller channels that ran to one side or the other, but we stayed in or with the main cave. We had been told about the cave by our good friend Larry and Kathy. They were our age and had many of the same experiences. They also had 4 children. They had only boys. They wanted a girl so badly. When we were about half a mile into the cave, we had to get on our bellies to crawl a narrow passage. It was damp and a little muddy, but we made it through. On the other side of the channel was opened up into a relatively large room. Stephanie and I stopped in this room and explored it. There was a creek that ran through it at the other end. The room was maybe 30 foot by 60 foot. It was 10 or 12 foot high. We sat on the bank of the creek and watched the salamanders play on the other side. As we sat there, we decided we would work our way back out of the cave. We couldn't remember which way to go to explore further. There were two ways to proceed from here. When I stood up, there was what looked like a stalactite hanging from the ceiling. I reached up to break it off. When I got hold of it, it was soft and furry. I let go of it as quickly as I could. It was a bat, and it was warm to the touch. It flew away further into the cave. Stephanie started laughing at me so hard she cried. I was embarrassed, so it made me a little mad. We were over it before we started back. I never grabbed for another stalactite again. It was winter when we were exploring that cave. I'm surprised we didn't find wild animals hiding from the cold inside. We got back home just before dark. We picked the kids up from mom's house. By this time, they were back. We were living in the house Uncle John had built 15 years earlier. Within a week, we had a snowstorm that caused the temperature to plummet. It got very cold. An ice storm came on top of the heels of the snowstorm. The second storm put the power out for several hours. We had coal lamps the, throughout the house for such an occasion. When bedtime came that Saturday night, we had the kids dress in our room. We did this so we didn't have to carry around the lamps. The power stayed off until after we put the kids to bed. It came on somewhere around 10 o'clock. Stephanie and I were sitting in the living room when the power came back on. We went through the house to the turn lights off and settled down to watch the news. We had a wood heating stove, so to smell something burning didn't alarm us very quickly. By the time we realized that had what we were smelling, our room was fully engulfed in flames. I quickly shut the door to our bedroom. We got the kids up and took them out to the car. Stephanie drove them to mom's and called the fire department. I stood out in front of the house and waited for the volunteer fire department to come. The truck arrived in about 10 minutes. The whole house had begun to burn by then. The men started to roll out their hoses when the first bullets exploded. Soon there were multiple explosions from the six boxes of shells inside my bedroom. We all took cover behind our cars. Stephanie and Dad came back by that time. We watched as everything we owned went up in flames. On the bright side, we were all safe. The community helped with clothes and a fundraiser to get us by until the house insurance company paid the claim. Trusting in God is what got us through this difficult time. When the insurance money came, the first thing Stephanie and I did was to buy a trailer house, and it was moved to the west of where the old house stood. We began the cleanup of the remains so we could rebuild. Before I got rebuilt, Before I could rebuild, I had to have another knee surgery done. The injury never got much better. To repair it was my only option. Stephanie took me to the hospital in Fayetteville for the operation. When I came out of surgery, Stephanie met me at the elevator. I told her that my belly hurt. She said, "You had your knee operated on." So I said, "Oh, my knee hurts." She laughed at me for not knowing. I just knew it hurt. I spent a week in the hospital. I spent 8 more weeks in therapy before I was able to work again. My wife was by my side every step of the way. It is nice to be loved. As things progressed, we began to build a house where the last one stood. It was a kit house. We had very small payments as we erected the house. It was a 1.5 story house. It was 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. Stephanie and I worked on it every day. We had it in the dried in condition within 3 months. We were able to move into it in 9 months. We worked fast and took all the help we could get. After we moved into the house, we got a letter from the kit house company telling us that the payment would go from $129 a month up to a whopping $459 a month. Stephanie and I had already sold the trailer house and put the money into the house we had just built. We were without options now. We could see clearly that we would lose the new house. We were able to stay in the house for another 4 months before we had to leave. While we were there, I started building a round picnic table out of one of those large reels used to carry high tension electric wires. It was about 4 foot across the top. I was nailing it together when a nail kicked back and impaled my eye. I fell to my back in pain and just lay there. Little Michelle came skipping by and walked over to me. She lifted my hand off my face and greeted me. I said nothing. As she went into the house, Stephanie asked her, "Where's your daddy at?" She replied, "He's is outside taking a nap on the ground." Stephanie came running out to check on me and found where the nail had been in my eye. She took me in the house and took the kids to dad, while she and mom took me to the hospital in Tahlequah. I had emergency surgery within an hour. They saved my eye and it functions perfectly now. Shortly after this, we had to move to Stillwell because we lost the house. During the move, I injured my other knee and ended up on welfare again. This time, Stephanie and I spoke of how we could change our lives through this unfortunate event, and I asked about going to college. They said I could if I got tested to see where my talents lay. The first training they wanted to consider was for a trade school. I was sent to Mulgee, Oklahoma, that was about 200 miles from where I lived with Stephanie and the kids. I was sent to a converted army base with the types of barracks used in World War II. They were very uncomfortable. The hardest thing to bear was being away from Stephanie for the 2 weeks. I was able to stay there for 3 days before I had to go home. I was so homesick I couldn't concentrate on anything. I felt sick from being alone. I drove back home on Wednesday night. Stephanie and the kids ran out to greet me with such passion and tears in their eyes. I think it was as hard on all of them as it was me. Thursday, I went to the welfare office and told them what had happened. I had a very compassionate worker who made arrangements for Stephanie and I to go to Tulsa for 2 days testing season. I was able to endure not having the kids with us because I had Stephanie by my side. As I tested, I would do the best I could on every test I was given. The test indicated the test included high hand-eye coordination, word recognition, spotting patterns, next numbers, and many other kinds of tests. When it was all done, I was called into the office to let me know the results. I was told that anything I wanted to choose, I could do. I could be able to understand in any training course, of course, or course of study. I went to the hotel to get Stephanie and head home to see the kids. Stephanie had worried about them the whole time we were gone. On the way home, we talked about should be what I should be educated in to make a living. I was able to talk to Stephanie within more. I'm sorry, let me. I was able to talk to Stephanie with more openness than with anyone else. I settled on learning computer engineering. We both decided that would be our family's best option. I saw my caseworker. He agreed with us. The next question was where would I like to be trained? And he sent me catalogs on the colleges that had the courses of study. Stephanie and I went to several colleges to check out their programs. We decided that Clarimore's Roger State College had the degree I wanted to seek. We told the worker and we were given the okay. Our next job was to get ready for the move and to find a house in Claremore, Oklahoma. We made the trip to Claremore and got a newspaper. We found a house that suited us. We called the owner and arranged to rent it on August 3rd. Dad said he would help us move. We spent the last 2 weeks of July packing and getting ready to move. A new chapter in our lives was about to start. I went to I went the first semester, and Stephanie stayed home taking care of the kids that were not in school yet. The welfare office told us that Stephanie had to go to work or go to school. We talked about this a lot. She was afraid to go to college because she had dropped out of school when we got married. She was 14 years just out of junior high. I convinced her that she could do it. I also told her that we would grow apart if I became educated and she did not. I didn't know what made her decide to go to college, but I'm glad she did. Stephanie and I took many classes together as we could. I majored in electronics and she had no major. We graduated the same year with the same class, in the same class. That concludes this chapter. The last chapter of this book is My Journal by Stephanie Jones. It's a journal she wrote while we were going to school there. And she had an English class and she wrote this journal and it was put away and we never thought about it, talked about it. I didn't even know. I remember her writing one, but I never did read it. Many years later, when she died in 2015, I read it, found it, and read it in 2016, and it brought tears of joy to my eyes, and it brought a great sadness at my loss. But we will read that the next time. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you like it, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share this with your friends so that they can hear these stories. I've got my whole life story written from about 9 years old up until I was about 72. I think you will enjoy it because we did not have a usual life. This is my web page on the internet, Curtis-Jones-Books. curtisjones.squarespace.com. It's got links to the books. You could buy them, and it tells you a little something about every book that I've written. And this is my Facebook page, Curtis Jones Author page at Facebook. It has links to the other places as well. God bless you and keep you, and we will talk the next time I present one of these.